There's something I've been sitting with for a while now. This whole idea of being the strong one, not loud, strong, or dramatic strong. I'm talking about the quiet kind, the kind that just holds everything together without even asking for credit. And I keep wondering, what does that actually cost? Especially when you're the step parent, especially when you've already walked into an already existing family story. So, this woman, and she didn't plan any of this. She fell in love, thought she was choosing a person, a partnership, something that felt real and mutual. She had no idea she was also choosing all of this emotional complexity that comes with it. But it happened fast. She became the steady one, the mature one, the one who understands. And not just understands, but the one that is kind of expected to, always. So she talks herself through it every single day. They've been through a lot. The kids have history. The dynamic is fragile. Just be patient. And so she adjusts. She swallows things that she probably shouldn't have to swallow. She watches her tone. She makes herself smaller in moments that actually feel enormous on the inside. And it's not because she's weak, it's because she wants peace. She's choosing it over and over again. And at some point, without anyone really noticing, including herself, she just became the strong one. Now, I want to talk about you for a second. There are mornings you wake up and you already know. Before anyone says a word, before the day even gets really started, you can feel the emotional temperature of the whole house just in the air. And so it begins. You start measuring your words before you even get out of bed. You're already thinking about what might set something off, already rehearsing patience for a conversation that hasn't even happened yet. And you tell yourself, I can handle this. And maybe you can. You probably can. That's kind of the whole problem, isn't it? Because nobody stops you to ask you if you should have to handle it alone. This question doesn't really come up because you're strong. You've always figured it out. So why would anyone worry? But here's the thing about strength. When it's not a choice anymore, when it's just expected, when it's every single day without a break, it stops feeling like strength. It starts feeling like pressure. And pressure over time is heavy, no matter how strong you are. There was this moment I had, and honestly, nobody around me even noticed because it wasn't some big breakdown. There were no tears, no arguments. It was just really quiet. And I realized I've been managing everyone else's emotions before I checked in with my own. The kids were pulling away. I stayed warm. My husband was stressed. I stayed understanding. And if something felt genuinely unfair, I told myself, don't overreact. Keep it together over and over and over again. And at some point, I just thought, when do I get to be the one who doesn't have it together? Like, when is it my turn to need something? Because that's what no one really talks about when it comes to blended families. Being the strong one often just means being the emotional regulator, the person who just absorbs, adjusts, and keep the temperature in the house from rising. And that's a lot. It's a really specific kind of exhausting, not the tired from a long day kind. It's the kind that sits in your chest, the kind that builds up slowly because you kept telling yourself it was fine. You could handle it. It wasn't a big deal until one day it kind of was. And you might not even call it resentment. That word might feel a bit too strong. So you call it fatigue. You call it being tired. And that feels more honest, more manageable. It shows up in small ways, an offhand comment that you let go of in the moment, but it just stays with you longer than it should. A family memory that gets brought up that you weren't a part of. And there's this tiny stink you can't quite explain. A boundary that feels off, but it's so hard to put into words that you don't even bother trying. So you pause, you take a break, you choose grace. again. And I want to be clear, grace is real and a beautiful thing. Choosing it isn't weakness, it takes something. Here's what I think we don't talk about enough: grace that's never returned, grace that nobody acknowledges, grace that you just keep extending quietly in a room that doesn't even notice. That starts to cost you something. It stops feeling like a choice and starts feeling like an erasure, like you're disappearing just a little bit every single time. I think this might be the hardest part of all of this, honestly. Your strength is invisible. Nobody celebrates you for staying calm, and there's no moment where someone pulls you aside and says, "Hey, I saw how you handled that, and it meant something." You don't get recognized for swallowing a reaction or for the mental math you're doing constantly, every day, in almost every interaction. You just keep the peace. And here's the thing about peace: once it exists, people stop noticing it. It becomes the baseline, it becomes normal. And normal doesn't get acknowledged, it just gets expected. So the effort disappears. All those small, deliberate choices you made to keep things steady, gone, absorbed into just the way things are around here. And I think that's a specific kind of lonely that step parents experience, not because no one loves you, not because things fall apart, but because something that costs you so much just gets taken for granted over and over again, and you keep showing up anyway. There's also this unspoken expectation that kind of just comes with the role. You walked into this family, so you should be adaptable, flexible, understanding. That's just part of the deal. And so you are. You really are. But adaptability has a sneaky way of sliding into something else. You start bending in places you didn't even realize you were bending. You start tolerating things that honestly you would have questioned before. Not because your standards changed, but because you don't want to be the difficult one, the one who makes things harder, the one who just couldn't adjust. So instead, you become the strong one. And it feels better than the alternative. At least it has a name that sounds like something good. But I want to say something here, and I mean this gently. Strength in this role, it mostly looks like silence, and silence can feel noble. It can feel like the mature choice, the right choice, and sometimes it is. But silence also creates this quiet kind of loneliness that's hard to explain to people who haven't felt it. Because when you're always the steady one, people start to forget that you have a limit. They forget that you're not just the adult in the room holding it all together. You're a person, an actual person with insecurities that don't disappear because you've learned to hide them, with triggers, with needs that are just as real as everyone else's in the family. And somewhere along the way, that got forgotten, maybe even by you. And here's the question I think a lot of people in this role don't say out loud: what would happen if I just stopped? Like, what if I let myself actually be affected by something? What if I admit that something hurt instead of talking myself out of it? What if I asked for reassurance for once instead of just automatically being the one that gives it? Would everything fall apart? Or would it just rebalance? That question feels risky, I know, because you build something real around being the steady one, reliable, safe, the person people can count on. And that identity means something to you. It's not nothing. But I keep coming back to this one question: who is holding you steady? And I want to be clear about something. I don't think the goal here is to stop being strong. That's not it at all. Strength genuinely is part of who you are, and that's a part that makes you capable of loving people in complicated, messy, non-linear situations. But maybe strength doesn't have to mean containment at all costs. Maybe it can include softness, Maybe it can sound like, this is heavy for me right now. Maybe it can look like getting someone else to show up for you just for a moment instead of always being the one who shows up for everyone else. Being the strong one in a blended family isn't a flaw. It really isn't. Most of the time, it comes from love, genuine, real love. But love shouldn't ask you to disappear, and strength shouldn't mean you're completely alone in your experience. So, if you've been carrying more than what you've been saying out loud, if you've been holding it together on the outside while quietly stretching thin on the inside, I'm not asking you to fix it right now. I'm not asking you to make it into something dramatic. I just hope you let yourself see it. Because sometimes the first thing that needs to change isn't anything external. It's just admitting to yourself, honestly, just admitting to yourself that the weight is real, that is there, that you don't have to keep pretending it is not. That's really what I've been thinking about, the weight of being the strong one. Not as something to be proud of, not as a badge you wear, but as something that deserves its own gentleness, its own care. Because I think we've gotten it a little wrong. Strength doesn't have to mean you never put anything down. It doesn't have to mean you carry it all indefinitely without complaint. Maybe the healthiest version of strength is actually knowing when to set something down and being okay with that. There's something I've been noticing for a while now, a pattern, and it's not loud or even dramatic. It's actually really quiet, easy to miss. It's this slow shift that happens to a lot of women when they step into this role. I'm not even sure I want to call it a mistake, honestly. That word feels harsh, too judgmental. It feels more like an instinct, a very human one. And it's the instinct to belong, to be accepted, to just make it work. And there's nothing wrong with that instinct. It comes from a good place. But here's the thing. When you pour all of yourself into becoming what this role needs you to be, when that's the only thing you're focused on over time, it starts to cost you more than you'd expect, more than you'd even realize while it's happening. There was this moment, and it wasn't dramatic at all, which is actually what made it hit harder. Someone had asked me what I've been enjoying lately. A simple question, the kind of question you answer without thinking. And I had nothing. I couldn't answer it. Not because my life was bad, not because I was in crisis, but because I genuinely didn't know. I hadn't thought about it. I hadn't checked in with myself for so long that I didn't even have an answer ready. I could have told you about the kids' schedules without missing a beat. I could have told you about the emotional temperature of the house and what everyone was going through, what everyone needed. I had all of that at the top of my mind, but my own inner world, I just left it unattended for a while, and that realization didn't knock me over. It wasn't some big wake-up call moment. It was quieter than that. It felt more like finally noticing you've been holding your breath, not for a few seconds, but for way more or longer than you realized, and you didn't even know you were doing it. Relationships require compromise. Blended families require extra patience. That's true. But what happens quietly underneath all of that? You stop noticing how much of yourself have been slowly absorbed into the role. It doesn't happen all at once. It's gradual enough that there's no single moment you can point to. You just look up one day and realize you've been disappearing a little at a time for longer than you thought. And the tricky part is you might not even catch it while it's happening. It feels noble. It feels like the loving thing to do, the mature thing. And in a lot of ways, it is. So there's no alarm that goes off. Nothing tells you to slow down or pull back. But here's what I've seen happen and what I think is worth saying out loud. Pouring all of yourself into this role, losing yourself inside of it, can quietly grow into resentment. Not the kind you see coming, the slow, confusing kind. And it's not because you don't love the kids. It's not because you've made the wrong choice or you regret any of it. It's because no identity, no matter how meaningful, should swallow a whole person. You were a woman before you became a stepmom. You had preferences that were just yours, dreams, ways of moving through the world that had nothing to do with anyone else's schedule or needs or feelings. And when all of that quietly gets pushed to the back, when it becomes secondary to proving yourself in this role, something starts to shrink. Not all at once, until one day someone asks you a simple question about yourself, and you realize you don't quite know how to answer it anymore. And here's maybe the hardest thing to admit out of all of it. Sometimes we lose ourselves in this role because it actually feels safer than standing apart from it. Think about it. You fully merge into being a stepmom. If that becomes the whole of you, you don't have to sit with that uncomfortable feeling of being an outsider. You don't have to wrestle with the fact that you're separate from something that already existed before you got there. And here's what I want to say about that. Separation isn't rejection. It's not distance. It's not coldness. It's not a sign that you don't love these people. It's identity. It's just knowing where you end and where the role begins. And blended families already blur so many lines on their own. The boundaries are complicated. The relationships don't fit into neat categories or clean lines. And there's already so much that's undefined and in between. So if you blur yourself on top of all of that, if you dissolve into the role hoping it makes you feel more like you belong, you don't get more stability. You actually lose your footing. You need to know who you are inside of this family, not just what you do for it. You can love people completely and still mourn the version of you that existed before you loved them. Both things can be true. Let me say this clearly. You're not just a stepmom. You're not just a stable adult holding a complicated dynamic together. That's part of you, sure, but it's not all of you. You're a whole person who stepped into a role, and there's a really important difference between those two things. Roles are supposed to fit into your life. They're supposed to be something you carry, not something that carries you off entirely. And when you pour every single part of yourself into one identity, when you let it take up all the space, it creates an imbalance, not because you did something wrong, not because you loved too much or tried too hard, but because no single role is built to hold an entire person. It's just not designed for that. Not stepmom, not mom, not wife, not any of them. You were a full person before this, and you're still supposed to be one inside of it. And I want to be very clear about something because I think it gets misunderstood. The mistake isn't loving deeply. Loving deeply is never the problem. That part is good. That part is worth keeping. The mistake is believing that deep love requires you to make yourself smaller. That the more you minimize yourself, the more it proves how much you care. It doesn't work that way. Children don't benefit from a stepmom who's erased herself. They don't need a shell of a person who's given everything away and has nothing left. They benefit from a woman who is present, grounded, and actually knows who she is. Your partner doesn't benefit from someone who has no interior life left, no opinions, no needs, no space that's just hers. That's not a partnership, that is performance. And you definitely don't benefit from disappearing in the name of keeping the peace. Harmony built on top of your own erasure or erasing yourself isn't really harmony. It's just a quiet kind of imbalance. You can love this family deeply and still take up space. Those two things aren't in conflict. They never were. What if being a healthy stepmom isn't about how much of yourself you can give away? What if it's actually about integration, bringing yourself into this family fully rather than disappearing into it? Where your identity stays intact, where you still do the things that make you you, not because you've checked out, but because they matter and you matter. Where your interests don't just survive this role, they coexist with it. Where your boundaries aren't something you apologize for, where you still have a life that exists outside of this family system. Friendships, passion, quiet mornings, whatever it is that reminds you of who you are. Not because you love them less, not because you're holding back or keeping distance, but because you're showing up as a whole person. And a whole person is so much more sustainable for everyone than someone who slowly hollowed herself out of trying to prove she was enough. That's not selfishness. That's just wholeness. And honestly, that might be the most loving thing you can offer. And here's what I've noticed happens when you actually hold on to yourself through all of this. Your presence gets steadier. Not because you're trying harder, but because you're not running on empty. There's something real underneath you again. The resentment, that quiet, hard to name kind of thing, it starts to erase because you're not given from a place of depletion anymore. You're not knuckling through every hard moment. And the joy, when it shows up, actually feels like joy, not relief. Not just the absence of tension, real, genuine joy that you didn't have to manufacture. Because here's the difference. You're choosing this role every day. You're choosing it, not because you've lost yourself inside of it and don't know how to find your way out, but because you actually want to be here. And that shift is subtle. It doesn't announce itself. Nobody's going to throw a parade over it, but it changes the quality of everything, of how you show up, of how you show love, how you feel at the end of a long day. Choosing something fully and freely feels completely different than being consumed by it. And the people around you feel that difference too, even if they can't name it. So if you found yourself completely wrapped up in this identity, if most of your days are spent trying to prove you're enough in this role, I just want you to pause for a second, not to pull away, not to detach or check out or love anyone less, but just to remember. You existed before this title. You were someone before you became a stepmom, and you're allowed to keep existing beyond it. This role is a part of you. It's not the whole of you. And sometimes, I really believe this, sometimes the most loving thing you can offer a blended family is to stay fully yourself inside of it. Here's the thing I keep coming back to though. As a step parent, you're already navigating complexity that most people can't even imagine. You're already doing hard things. So why not also build depth while you're at it? Why not cultivate wisdom? Why not pursue excellence in areas that are just yours? Your life is not confined to this one role. You're multidimensional. You're capable. And honestly, you're called to keep growing regardless of what season you're in. So take the chance, shift the thinking, elevate the habits, be intentional about who you're spending your time with and what that time is doing to you. Because here's what I've noticed. The more you grow internally, the less suffocating any external role feels. When you're genuinely expanding as a person, you stop resenting your responsibilities. You start integrating them into something bigger, a fuller life, a richer one. And that's how you stay powerful. Not performative, but gently and quietly evolving and still becoming, still building, still believing there's more in you. And actually, choosing to go after it. If you've enjoyed this episode, I'd like you to go ahead and subscribe, leave a comment, leave a like, and I'll see you in the next one. Love y'all.